The ironwood dam had groaned for 6 nights under the weight of early spring melt, creaking like the bones of some ancient titan pressed beyond endurance. Elowen Hart could hear it even from her cottage, a mile downstream, where the forest grew thick and the Blackwood River cut a dark ribbon through the valley floor. But it was not the groaning that woke her that night. It was the silence. Then came the sound. Not a crack or a crash, but something deeper, a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the mountain had split open and poured its fury into the valley below. Elowen threw open the shutters and saw it, a wall of water rolling toward her through the moonlight, black as pitch and crowned with foam, dragging trees and boulders and pieces of the world that had been whole just moments before. She did not waste time on fear. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. Before we go deeper into Elowen's story, I invite you to subscribe and share in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence here matters. Now, let's continue. Elowen stood at the edge of her pasture, boots already soaked, watching the river transform into something monstrous. The pasture fence disappeared beneath the surge. The chicken coop listed sideways, then vanished. Water climbed the hillside with terrifying purpose, swallowing everything in its path. She had learned to survive alone these past 18 months, ever since the village elders had named her a liar and cast her out for refusing to marry the merchant's son after he'd tried to claim her by force. The forest had been her sanctuary, solitude her shield, but now the river threatened to take even that. Her thoughts turned to the rope bridge, her only connection to the distant trading post where she bartered herbs and pelts for salt and steel. Should she run for it before the flood claimed that too? Every survival instinct screamed yes, but something else cut through the roar of water. A cry, high and desperate, barely audible over the deluge. Elowen's heart stopped. She ran to the water's edge, scanning the churning torrent. There, caught on a jagged outcrop of rock jutting from the current like a broken tooth, a wooden crate pitched and rolled, taking on water with every wave. And inside, 2 small shapes writhed, their cries growing weaker. Pups, wolf pups, their eyes barely open, their fur slicked dark with river water and something else, blood. The cold bit into her ankles as she stepped into the shallows. Every rational thought in her mind screamed the same warning. Wolves had taken her father when she was 12. Wolves were death wrapped in fur. But these were not hunters. These were babies, drowning. She waded deeper, the current immediately seizing her skirts, trying to drag her under. The water rose to her thighs, then her waist, shockingly cold even through her wool dress. Her fingers found the ancient oak at the water's edge, and she wrapped her leather belt around the trunk, then around her own waist, creating a crude tether. If the river took her, at least it would not take her far. The current battered her legs, threatened to sweep them out from under her. She pushed forward, step by agonizing step, feeling for solid ground that kept shifting beneath her feet. The crate was perhaps 20 feet away. It might as well have been a mile. The pups' cries grew frantic. They could sense her. Their tiny paws scrabbled at the crate's sides, claws finding no purchase on the wet wood. Elowen reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of the crate just as a surge of debris, branches, mud, something that might have been part of a roof, slammed into her shoulder. She went under. The world became a chaos of black water and tumbling stones. Her lungs screamed. The belt around her waist went taut, dragging her back toward the oak, but she twisted, fighting the current, fighting the tether, her hands clawing blindly until they found wood, the crate. She hauled it against her chest and kicked hard, breaking the surface with a gasp that tore her throat raw. The belt pulled her back to shore. She crawled the last few feet on her knees, the crate pressed to her body like a shield, the pups inside whimpering and shaking. When she finally collapsed onto solid ground, she set the crate down carefully, her hands trembling so violently she could barely unfasten the latch. Inside were 2 wolf pups, their gray and silver fur matted with blood and river silt, their eyes wide with terror. One had a gash across its shoulder, the other's paw hung at an unnatural angle. They were dying. She pulled them free, tucking one under each arm, and ran to flee for the cottage, but something made her look back. The outcrop, there was something else there. A shape, massive and gray, clinging to the rock with what little strength remained. A wolf. Not just any wolf, but something enormous, easily the size of a horse, its silver-streaked coat darkened by water and blood. One of its legs was twisted beneath it, and protruding from its ribs, glinting in the moonlight, was a jagged shard of silver. Hunter's work. Assassin's work. The water was rising faster now, lapping at the rack where the great wolf clung. In minutes, maybe seconds, the current would take him. Elowen looked down at the pups in her arms, their small bodies shaking, their eyes fixed on the distant shape with something that looked like recognition, like desperation. They knew him. Every instinct told her to run, to get the pups to safety and let the river take what it would. She had sworn never to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. She had built her life on that vow. But the pups' cries cut through her resolve like a blade through silk. Elowen set the pups in the crate on high ground, ignoring their frantic yelps, and waded back into the flood. The current was stronger now, deeper, the water rising past her chest. Her half swam, half crawled toward the outcrop, her muscles burning, her vision blurring from the cold. When she finally reached the great wolf, his eyes opened, amber and ancient, and filled with something that looked almost like surprise. She grabbed him by the scruff, the way she'd seen hunters drag their kills, and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, dead weight that barely shifted, but she braced her feet against the rock and hauled with everything she had. The wolf's body slid an inch, then another. The outcrop shuddered beneath them, cracks spiderwebbed across the stone. Elowen screamed, a sound of pure defiance, and dragged the wolf into the current. The water helped now, lifting his bulk, carrying them both downstream toward the bank. She kicked with legs that had gone numb, steered them with her free arm, fought for every gasping breath. When her feet finally found solid ground, she collapsed forward, dragging the wolf the last few yards through the mud until they were both clear of the water. Behind them, the outcrop gave way with a sound like thunder, vanishing into the flood. Elowen lay there in the mud, her chest heaving, her body shaking from exhaustion and cold. The pups had gone silent in their crate. The great wolf lay beside her, unmoving save for the shallow rise and fall of his ribs. She sat up slowly, her gaze traveling from the pups to the great wolf and finally to the glint of silver embedded in his side. The metal had been driven deep, deliberately placed to kill slowly. This was not hunter's work. This was murder. The rope bridge gave way with a distant crack, its timbers swept into the darkness. The valley was drowning, taking with it her last connection to the outside world. Elowen stood, her legs trembling, and looked back toward her cottage. The flood had stopped its advance, but the damage was done. She was cut off, alone, with 2 dying pups and a wolf that shouldn't exist, a creature far too large to be natural, wounded by weapons that spoke of conspiracy and betrayal. She lifted the crate with the pups and began the slow climb toward shelter. Behind her, the great wolf stirred, his amber eyes tracking her movement through the darkness. Then, in a voice that should not have been possible from a wolf's throat, he spoke.
"My children." Elowen's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, staring at the creature that had just spoken with human words. The wolf's eyes held hers for a long moment before they closed again, his strength spent. Elowen stood frozen between the cottage and the dying creature, between the life she'd built in isolation and the impossible choice that now lay before her. The pups whimpered, The wolf's breathing grew shallower. The floodwaters receded, leaving the world transformed. And Elowin Hart, who had sworn to need no one, to trust no one, to let no one close enough to break her heart again, began to drag the impossible wolf toward her sanctuary. The storm had passed. Something else was just beginning. Chapter 1. The cottage floor was slick with muddy water when Elowin kicked the door shut. She set the crate near the hearth where embers still glowed faintly. The pups were shivering violently, their small whimpers cutting through the rain, hammering the roof. She stripped off her soaked dress, wrapped herself in a wool blanket, then stepped back into the rain. The wolf lay where she'd left him, his massive form barely visible in darkness. His shoulder came to her waist, his paws were the size of dinner plates, and the silver blade in his ribs gleamed like a curse. Elowin grabbed the canvas tarp from her woodpile and spread it beside him. She braced her shoulder against his ribs and pushed. He didn't budge. She tried again, digging her boots into the mud, throwing all her weight against him. This time he shifted, rolling part way onto the tarp. It took 3 more attempts to get him fully on the canvas. Her arms burned. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She grabbed the edge of the tarp and began to pull, dragging him inch by agonizing inch toward the cottage door. The threshold nearly defeated her. The tarp caught on the doorframe. Elowin screamed in frustration and hauled with everything she had left, and suddenly he was through, sliding across her floor in a trail of mud and blood. She collapsed against the wall. The pups watched her with wide, terrified eyes. The smaller one, with silver-tipped fur, tried to climb out, its injured paw dragging uselessly. "Stay," Elowin whispered, pushing the pup back inside before carrying the crate closer to the fire. The larger pup, darker gray with amber eyes, pressed against its sibling, both trembling. Blood pooled beneath the wolf, spreading across the floorboards. The silver in his side would kill him if she didn't remove it, but removing it might kill him faster. She moved to her shelf of herbs and medicines, yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for wounds, and there, wrapped in oilcloth, the small vial her grandmother had given her before she died. For poison, the old woman had said, when there's nothing else. She grabbed the vial, clean linen, and her sharpest knife. Then she knelt beside the wolf. His eyes opened as she approached, those impossible amber eyes that held centuries of memory. They fixed on her face, and she saw recognition there, awareness. "This is going to hurt," she said softly. "I'm sorry." The wolf's eyes closed, but one massive paw shifted, stretching until it rested near her knee. Permission, or perhaps resignation. Elowin gripped the silver blade. The metal burned her fingers even through cloth. Silver, the old tales were true then. Wolves that walked as men, silver that burned their flesh. She pulled. The wolf's body went rigid. A sound tore from his throat, something between a howl and a scream, too human for any animal. Blood gushed from the wound, hot and dark, soaking her hands. She pulled harder, feeling the blade scrape against bone, and then it came free, clattering to the floor. She pressed linen against the wound immediately, putting all her weight on it. The wolf had gone still, his breathing so shallow she could barely detect it. Behind her, the pups cried, high-pitched wails that sounded almost like children. "Don't you dare die," Elowin hissed. "Not after everything." She uncorked the vial with her teeth and poured the contents into the wound. The liquid hissed against torn flesh, steam rising in wisps. The wolf jerked once, violently, then went utterly still. Her heart hammered. She pressed her ear to his ribs, listening. For a terrible moment, there was nothing. Then faint but steady, she heard it. A heartbeat. She sat back, her hands covered in blood, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The bleeding had slowed. She packed the wound with yarrow and comfrey, then wrapped his torso in linen. By the time she finished, dawn was breaking beyond the shutters, painting thin lines of gray light across the floor. The pups had quieted, curled together and watching her with eyes too knowing for creatures so young. Elowen dragged herself to them. The silver-tipped pup whimpered as she lifted it out. Its shoulder was bleeding, the gash deep but not fatal. She cleaned and bound it, then moved to the dark gray one with the broken paw. Ash, she murmured as she set the splint, the name rising unbidden. The pup nuzzled her hand, and she felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she'd built to keep the world at bay. She looked at the silver-tipped one. And Lumi. They were hers now, all three of them, the pups and the dying wolf who'd spoken with a human voice. Elowen had no idea what she'd saved from the river, what kind of creatures now filled her cottage, what enemies might come looking. But as she settled onto the floor between them, her back against the wall, her knife within reach, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would protect them, no matter what it cost. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The ironwood forest held its breath, and in the silence, something ancient stirred, sensing that the balance of power had shifted in ways that would reshape the world. Chapter 2. 3 days passed, and the wolf did not wake. Elowen changed his bandages twice daily, cleaning the wound with boiled sage and thyme. Each time she expected rot, the telltale blackness of infection. But the wound remained clean, the edges knitting together with unnatural speed that defied everything she knew about healing. The pucks healed even faster. Ash's broken paw straightened beneath the splint, and Lumi's shoulder wound closed to a thin pink line within 2 days. They ate ravenously, devouring rabbit stew and sleeping in exhausted heaps by the fire. But on the 3rd night, Elowen discovered they were not what they appeared to be. She'd fallen asleep in her chair when a sound jolted her awake. Not a whimper or growl, but something else entirely. A giggle. Elowen's eyes snapped open. The fire had burned low, casting the cottage in flickering shadow. And there, where the pups had been sleeping, were 2 small children. A boy and a girl, no older than 3 or 4, both naked and covered in fine fur that was rapidly dissolving into human skin. The boy had dark hair and amber eyes. The girl's hair was silver-tipped, catching firelight like frost. They were playing with a wooden spoon, their laughter soft and musical. Elowen's hand flew to her mouth. The children turned, their eyes going wide. Then the little girl smiled, gap-toothed and innocent. Hungry? The boy nodded solemnly. Hungry. Shifters. The old stories were true. Not just the silver, but all of it. Wolves that became human. And these children were sitting in her kitchen asking for food, as if transforming from animals was the most natural thing in the world. She stood slowly, her legs shaking. You can talk. The girl tilted her head. Lumi, she said, pointing to herself. Then to the boy. Ash. I know your names, Elowen whispered. I gave them to you. Lumi's smile widened. Good names. Hungry. Elowen moved on autopilot, ladling stew into bowls. She found 2 of her father's old shirts and draped them over the children. They ate like starving animals, using their hands, licking the bowls clean. When they finished, they curled up by the fire, their small bodies already shimmering with that strange light. Wait, Elowen said. Don't go back yet. Where did you come from? Ash looked up, his amber eyes ancient despite his childish face. Papa, he said, pointing to the massive wolf. Bad man hurt Papa. Lumi nodded, her expression darkening. Silver,
Bad Silver. Who hurt your father? Elowen pressed, kneeling. But the light was already consuming them, their bodies shrinking, fur sprouting. Within seconds, they were pups again, fast asleep. Elowen sat back, her heart hammering. Shifter children, which meant their father was something more than animal, something powerful enough that someone had tried to kill him with silver and leave him to drown. She turned to look at him. My children, he'd said before collapsing. A father, a protector. Now he lay helpless in her home, his life hanging by a thread. She moved to his side and checked his pulse. Stronger now, steadier. The wound had closed completely, leaving only a raised scar. But something was still wrong. His breathing remained shallow, his body too still, as if trapped somewhere between life and death. She unwrapped the bandages carefully. The scar looked healed, but when she pressed her fingers against the skin, she felt something beneath the skin, something hard. Elowen grabbed her knife and held the blade over the fire until it glowed. Then, with a steady hand, she reopened the wound. The wolf's body jerked, but he didn't wake. Blood welled up, dark and thick. She pressed deeper, feeling for the foreign object. Her fingers closed around something small and jagged. She pulled, and it came free with sickening resistance. A fragment of silver, no larger than her thumbnail, blackened and twisted. It had broken off the blade, lodged deep near his lung. The silver had been poisoning him from the inside, slowly killing him even as his body tried to heal. She threw the fragment into the fire where it hissed and spat like a living thing. Then she cleaned the wound again, packed it with fresh herbs, and wrapped new bandages around his torso. This time, when she pressed her ear to his chest, his heartbeat was stronger, deeper. The poison was gone. Elowen sat back, exhaustion crashing over her. She'd saved him, for now, but questions gnawed at her mind. Who had tried to kill this creature? Why Silver? And what would happen when he finally woke? Outside, the forest had grown unnaturally quiet. No birds sang, no wind stirred the branches. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Elowen checked the door, made sure it was barred, then returned to her chair. She wouldn't sleep tonight, not with shifter children by her fire and a poisoned wolf king recovering on her floor. She'd wanted solitude, safety, to never let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But the river had brought her something else entirely, a choice, a responsibility, and whether she liked it or not, her isolated life had just become impossibly complicated.
Chapter 3. Dawn came slowly. Elowen hadn't slept. She sat in her chair, knife across her lap, watching the pups breathe and the wolf's chest rise with increasing strength. Her mind churned with impossible truths. Shifters, in her home, children who became wolves, a father who'd spoken with human words, the stories her grandmother had whispered, the tales the village elders dismissed as superstition, were real, and she'd pulled them from the river, bound their wounds with her own hands. What had she done? She moved to the window. The floodwaters had receded, leaving the valley transformed. Mud stretched where meadow had been. Trees lay scattered like broken toys, and her rope bridge was gone, swept away completely. She was trapped here, with them. A soft whimper drew her back. The pups were stirring, Lumi first, then Ash. That strange light shimmered across their fur as their bodies lengthened, reshaped, transformed. Within moments, 2 small children sat by the fire, naked and blinking. "Cold," Lumi announced. Ash nodded, teeth chattering. Hungry, too. Elowen moved mechanically, pulling shirts over their bodies, stirring porridge from her dwindling oats. She watched as they ate with surprising delicacy this time, using spoons, their movements almost human. Almost. "How long have you been able to do this?" Change, I mean. Lumi looked up, porridge on her chin. Always, since born. Papa teaches, Ash added. Teaches when to be wolf, when to be people. Eloan's gaze drifted to the massive wolf on her floor. Your father? Who is he? The children exchanged glances. Finally, Ash spoke, his voice dropping. Papa is king. King of the packs, Lumi clarified. All the packs, from the mountains to the sea. The words landed like stones. A king. She'd saved a king from drowning. The ruler of the shifters, the beings that existed in shadows between human settlements and wild places. The bad man, Eloan pressed, kneeling. The one who hurt your father. Who was he? Ash's face darkened, and for a moment something ancient flashed behind his young eyes. Uncle Bram, Papa's advisor. He wanted to be king. Betrayal, assassination, politics and power. Eloan's blood ran cold. She'd stepped into the middle of a coup, pulled a deposed king from death, and now harbored the heirs to a throne someone else had claimed. Does this Bram know you're alive? The children shook their heads. Water took us, Ash said. Everything dark. Papa put us in box, Lumi added, tears welling. Said hide, said be quiet. Then bad silver came. Eloan's heart twisted. The king had saved his children, even as he'd been mortally wounded, had hidden them and sent them into the flood rather than let them fall into his enemy's hands. He'd clung to that crate with dying strength, protecting them until she'd pulled them all from the river. We're safe now, she heard herself say, even as warnings screamed in her mind. You're safe here. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. If Bram had orchestrated a coup, murdered a king and his loyalists, he wouldn't stop hunting. He couldn't afford to, not with living heirs who could challenge his claim. And if he found them here, if he discovered a human woman had saved the very lives he'd tried to end, what would he do to her? Eloan moved to her window again, scanning the tree line. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no deer. Even the insects seemed to have fled. The entire wilderness was holding its breath, waiting. Does your father have allies? She asked without turning. Other packs that would help? Many, Ash said, but Bram killed the loyal ones, the ones who stayed at the citadel. Blood on the stones, Lumi whispered. So much blood. A massacre, swift and brutal, leaving the usurper in control and any opposition dead or scattered. The children had seen it, had fled through it with their father. Eloan turned back to face them, these impossible children with ancient eyes and blood-soaked memories. They watched her with something like hope, as if she might have answers, as if she could protect them from the nightmare they'd escaped. She was just one woman. One human woman with a bow, a knife, and a cottage at the edge of the world. She had no magic, no pack, no army, nothing except the stubborn will that had kept her alive through grief and betrayal and 18 months of solitude. But as she looked at Ash and Lumi, as she glanced at their father still fighting back to consciousness, she felt something shift inside her. Some wall she'd built to keep herself safe began to crack. Then we wait, she said finally. We wait for your father to wake, and when he does, we figure out what comes next, together. The children rushed to her, wrapping small arms around her legs. Eloan stood frozen, unused to touch, to trust, to the weight of other lives depending on her. Then, slowly, she placed her hands on their heads, feeling the warmth of them. Outside, something moved in the tree line. A shadow, there and gone. Eloan's hand went to her knife, but when she looked again, there was nothing. Just the forest, just the silence. But she knew with cold certainty that the quiet wouldn't last. The hunt had already begun.
Chapter 4. It happened at sunset on the 4th day. Eloan was teaching the children about mushrooms when the wolf's breathing changed. It grew deeper, labored, and then that strange light began to shimmer across his fur. "Papa,"
Lumi whispered, gripping Elowen's skirt. Ash moved to his father's side, kneeling. Papa's coming back. The transformation was brutal. The wolf's body contorted, bones reshaping with sickening cracks. Fur receded into skin, limbs lengthened, and then, where the wolf had been, there was a man. He was enormous, well over 6 feet of corded muscle and battle scars. His hair was long and silver-streaked. His face was harsh and weathered, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw. And when his eyes opened, they were the same impossible amber, ancient and wild and utterly inhuman. Those eyes found hers, pinning her in place. Then his gaze shifted to the children, and something in his expression cracked. "Ash," he said, his voice rough but commanding. "Lumi." The children launched themselves at him. He caught them despite his weakness, pulling them against his chest, his large hands cradling their heads. For a moment he just held them, his eyes closed, his entire body shaking. Elowen stood frozen with the blanket clutched in her hands, suddenly aware he was naked, that he was dangerous, that she had no idea what he might do. "You," he said softly, "you pulled us from the river." Elowen stepped forward, offering the blanket. He took it, wrapping it around his waist without breaking eye contact. "You removed the silver," he continued. "You healed us. There was a fragment lodged near your lung. The poison was killing you." Something flickered across his face. "You should have let me die. It would have been safer." "Probably," Elowen agreed, "but your children were crying." His arms tightened around Ash and Lumi. "My children. I tried to save them, put them in the crate, thought the river might carry them beyond Bram's reach. I was going to lead his hunters away, but the silver—" "You clung to their crate instead, kept them from going over the falls." He nodded. "I couldn't let them go alone." "Papa saved us," Lumi said fiercely. "Not this time," he said softly, looking at Elowen. "This time, someone else did." Elowen shifted under that intense gaze. "You told me about the coup, the massacre. They said your name is Rydian, that you're a king." "Was a king," he corrected bitterly. "Bram Hollowfang saw to that." He released the children gently, his hand probing the scar where the silver had been. "Bram was my most trusted advisor, my elder. He served my father before me, stood at my right hand for 20 years, and when I proposed peace with the human settlements, when I suggested we end the centuries of violence, he called it weakness." "The old ways," Elowen murmured. "The old ways," Rydian confirmed. "The blood feuds, the territories, the endless revenge. I wanted something different for my children." His voice hardened. Bram gathered those who agreed with him, traditionalists, warriors who saw peace as surrender. On the night of the first frost, they came for me. "The loyal ones died," Ash whispered. Rydian's hand moved to his son's hair. "The loyal ones died, slaughtered before they could rally. Bram had planned it perfectly. By the time I understood what was happening, he held the citadel. He came for me with silver weapons, knowing I wouldn't kill him without proof. That hesitation cost me everything." "But you escaped." "Barely. I grabbed the children and ran. Bram's hunters followed. The dam broke as we reached the river. I thought the flood might hide our scent. Instead, it nearly drowned us all." Silence fell. Elowen studied this man who'd lost everything trying to save his children. His body was covered in scars, his hands built for violence, yet they held his children with impossible tenderness. "Why tell me all this?" she asked. Rydian's gaze was steady. "Because Bram won't stop hunting. Because by saving us, you've made yourself a target. Because you deserve to know what danger you've brought into your home." "I already knew that," Elowen said quietly, "and I chose to keep you anyway." Hope flickered in those ancient eyes. "Why?" Elowen looked at the children, at their small faces so full of trust. She thought about her own losses, her own exile, the loneliness she'd wrapped around herself like armor. "Because I couldn't watch them die," she said simply. "Because sometimes surviving isn't enough. Sometimes you have to choose to live." Rydian studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then, slowly, he inclined his head in a gesture both ancient and profound. "Then I'm in your debt, Elowen Hart, and the debt of the Stormclaw line is not given lightly." Outside, the sun had set completely. The forest had grown quiet again, that unnatural, watchful quiet. Rydian's head lifted, his nostrils flaring. His body went rigid, every muscle suddenly tense. "They're here," he said softly. "Bram Stouts. They've found our scent."
Chapter 5. The scouts had come no closer. Rydian said they were testing, reporting back. It would be days before the real assault. They had time that settled into something unexpected, something almost like peace. Rydian recovered quickly, his shifter healing closing mortal wounds. Within 2 days, he moved with fluid grace, helping haul water, chop wood, reinforce the door. Elowen found herself watching him more than she should. But it was with the children that the real transformation happened. The forest had been her refuge, her teacher, her home. And now she found herself passing that knowledge to Ash and Lumi, who followed her through the woods with wide eyes and endless questions. "This one?" Lumi asked, pointing to mushrooms at the base of an oak. "Deathcap," Elowen said. "See the white gills, the ring on the stem? Beautiful and deadly. Never touch." Ash was already ahead, crouched by the stream, watching the water with predatory focus. "The trout hide under the bank," Elowen said, kneeling beside him. "In the shadows where the current is slow. You have to be patient, still as stone, and when they come out, you move fast." Ash's hand hovered over the water, perfectly motionless. Then, in a blur, he struck, pulling a silvery trout from the stream with a triumphant shout. "Well done," Rydian's voice came from behind them, and Elowen turned to find him leaning against a tree, watching. She hadn't heard him approach. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough," he said, his amber eyes warm. "You're a good teacher." Something in his voice made heat rise to her cheeks. She turned back to the children, showing them how to clean the fish, trying to ignore the weight of his gaze. It became a pattern. Each morning, Elowen would take the children into the forest, teaching them to read tracks, to identify plants that healed and poisoned, to move quietly through underbrush. And each morning, Rydian would follow at a distance, watching with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Snares here," she showed them one afternoon, setting wire loops along a game trail. "Rabbits always use the same paths." "We hunt as wolves," Ash said. "Chase them down. And if you're injured, if you can't shift, you need to know more than one way to survive." Rydian stepped forward, crouching beside them. "She's right. I taught you to hunt as wolves because that's what you are, but Elowen is teaching you to survive as both. That's wisdom I never had." Their eyes met over the children's heads, and something passed between them. Recognition, respect, something deeper that Elowen wasn't ready to name. That evening, as she prepared the rabbits they'd caught, Rydian appeared with wood. The children played nearby, shifting between forms with increasing ease, their laughter echoing. "They're happy," Rydian said softly. "I haven't seen them like this since before the massacre." "They're children," Elowen said. "They deserve happiness, even if it's temporary." "When Brahm comes, this ends," Rydian said darkly. "When Brahm comes, we fight, and we survive." Rydian studied her. "You're not afraid of me, of what's coming, of any of this." "I'm terrified," Elowen admitted, "but fear doesn't change what needs to be done." Something shifted in his expression. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked the strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender that Elowen's breath caught. "Do you know what you are to them, to my children?" Elowen shook her head. "You're their mother in every way that matters. They call for you in their sleep. They trust you with their lives." His amber eyes held hers. "And I—" He stopped, but the words hung between them, unspoken but understood. "Don't," Elowen whispered. "Don't say something we can't take back." "Why not?" His hand cupped her face, impossibly gentle for someone so dangerous. "You saved us, protected us, gave us a home when we had nothing. Do you think my wolf doesn't recognize its mate?" Mate. The word hung in the air like a spell. Elowen wanted to deny it, to protect herself, but she was tired of running, tired of being alone. "I'm human," her voice broke. "I can't be part of your world." "You already are," Rydian said. "The moment you pulled us from that river, you became part of my pack, part of my heart." Elowen's eyes burned. She wanted to believe him, but danger was still coming, and she'd learned everything you love can be taken away. "Ask me again," she whispered, "when this is over, when we've survived, when I know we have a future worth claiming." Rydian's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, then he pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture that felt ancient and binding. "Then I will fight," he said softly, "not to reclaim my throne, not for revenge, but for this, for you, for the life we could have." The children's laughter echoed. The fire crackled. For one perfect moment, Elowen imagined a future where this cottage held not refugees, but a family. Then the wind shifted, carrying a scent that made Rydian's entire body go rigid. "They're closer," he said, pulling away. "The scouts, they've crossed the ridge." The moment crashed, reality crashed back, and Elowen knew their fragile peace was ending. Elowen found the first marker at dawn. She'd risen early to check the snares, leaving Rydian and the children sleeping. The forest was unnaturally still, the silence that came before storms or predators. No birdsong, no rustle in the underbrush, just wind through bare branches and frosts beneath her boots. The marker was unmistakable. 3 parallel slashes carved deep into an ancient oak at the edge of her property. The cuts were fresh, sap still weeping, and beneath them, pressed into the earth, was a massive paw print. Wolf. Far larger than any natural wolf. Elowen's blood ran cold. She'd seen enough predator signs to know this was territorial marking, a claim, a warning. The message was clear. Something powerful was coming. She found 2 more markers on her way back, one on the lightning-struck pine, another on the stone outcrop where she'd first spotted the crate. Each time, 3 slashes, each time that massive print. The markers formed a circle, closing tighter around her home. Rydian was awake when she returned, standing in the doorway, his expression dark. He'd scented her fear. "You found them." Not a question. Elowen nodded, her throat tight. 3 so far, all within a mile of the cottage. Rydian's jaw clenched. Bram's work. He's letting me know he's found us, that he's taking his time, savoring it. "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe less." He turned to look at the forest, his amber eyes scanning the tree line. "He's circling, testing our defenses. When he's satisfied he knows every weakness, every escape route, he'll strike. And he won't come alone." Elowen moved past him into the cottage, where the children still slept in their pile of blankets by the hearth. They looked so small, so innocent. The thought of Bram's hunters finding them, of silver blades and blood on her cottage floor, made something fierce and terrible rise in her chest. "Then we prepare," she said quietly. "We turn this cottage into a fortress. We use every advantage we have." Rydian studied her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You're not running." "I've done enough running. This is my home. These are my children now, too. Let Bram come. Let him see what happens when he threatens what's mine." Something shifted in Radayan's expression. He crossed to her in 2 strides, his large hands framing her face, his forehead pressing to hers in that gesture she'd come to recognize as deeply significant among his kind. "You are remarkable," he whispered, "and when this is over, I will spend every day proving myself worthy of you." They spent the day fortifying. Radayan showed Elowen where to place snares that would catch wolves instead of rabbits, how to set tripwires with bells that would alert them to approaching danger. She taught him about the hollow beneath the floorboards where she'd hidden her winter stores, a space large enough to hide 2 small children if the worst came to pass. As the sun set, painting the sky in blood and amber, Elowen found more markers. Closer now, one on the apple tree in her yard, another on the well. The circle was tightening. Bram was at her doorstep. That night, the full moon rose over the ironwood, huge and silver. Elowen couldn't sleep. She sat outside with her bow, watching the tree line. The forest had gone silent hours ago. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Radayan emerged from the cottage, moving with the fluid grace that marked him as something other than human. He'd left the children sleeping, their small forms curled together for warmth and comfort. He settled beside Elowen on the bench, close enough that their shoulders touched. "The full moon," he said softly. "It calls to us, makes the shift easier, the wolf stronger. Bram will know I feel it. He'll be expecting me to lose control, to let the beast take over." "Will you?" Elowen asked. Radayan's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not while I have something worth fighting for as a man." They spent a while in silence, watching the moon climb higher. Finally, Elowen spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I fled the village, that they cast me out, but I never told you why." Radayan turned to look at her, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You don't have to." "I want to." She took a shaky breath. "There was a man, the merchant's son, Thomas Greaves. His family owned half the village, controlled the trade routes, held the purse strings. He decided he wanted me, and what Thomas Greaves wanted, he took." Her hands tightened on the bow. Radayan's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "He cornered me in the granary one night after market, said we'd be married by spring whether I wanted it or not, said his father had already arranged it with the elders. When I refused, when I tried to leave, her voice broke. He tried to force the matter, tried to make sure I'd have no choice but to accept his proposal." Radayan's entire body had gone rigid, his breathing carefully controlled. "Did he?" "No," Eloise said quickly. "I had my father's knife, the one I still carry. I cut him, not deep, but enough to make him let go, enough to leave a scar. I ran straight to the elders, told them everything, showed them the bruises, the torn dress." "And they did nothing," Radayan said, his voice deadly quiet. "Worse than nothing. They called me a liar, said I'd seduced him and then changed my mind, that I'd attacked him unprovoked to avoid an honorable marriage. Thomas showed him his wound, and they believed him over me. His family had money, power, influence. I had nothing. No family left, no dowry, no standing. I laughed bitterly. The elders gave me a choice: marry Thomas and accept my place, or leave the village and never return. So you left." "I left that night, took what I could carry and walked until I found this place. I'd rather die alone in the forest than spend my life with a man who saw me as property." She turned to look at him, her amber eyes full of determination. "That's why I understand your children, why I couldn't let them drown, because I know what it's like when the people who should protect you become the ones you have to escape." Radayan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely controlled rage. "If I ever meet this Thomas Greaves, he will answer to me, and he will not enjoy the conversation." "He's not worth your anger," Elowen said. "He's nothing.
a small man with a small soul who needed to hurt someone weaker to feel powerful. He hurt you, Radian said fiercely. That makes him everything to me. Elowen felt something break open in her chest, some last wall she'd been holding on to. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. Radian turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with that impossible gentleness. I know that you risked your life to save strangers. I know that you tend my children's wounds with more care than you give your own. I know that you teach them not just to survive, but to live. I know that you stand ready to fight an enemy you can't hope to defeat rather than abandon us. His amber eyes burned into hers. I know that you are everything I never knew I needed, everything my wolf has been searching for. Your mate, Elowen said, the word still strange on her tongue. My mate, my chosen, the one my soul recognizes as its other half. He pressed his forehead to hers again. I know you're human. I know our worlds are different. I know you have every reason to fear trusting anyone again. But I swear to you, Elowen Hart, on my life and my children's lives, you will never be alone again. You will never be unprotected. You will never be anything less than cherished. Tears burned in Elowen's eyes. You can't promise that. Bram is coming. You might. Then I will die protecting you, Radian said simply, and my last thought will be gratitude that I got to know you, that I got to see my children loved by someone as fierce and brave as you, that I got to experience this, even if only for a moment.
Don't, Elowen choked out. Don't talk about dying. Not tonight. Ridian's thumb brushed away her tears. Then what should we talk about? The future, she whispered. Tell me about the future we'll have when this is over. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from harsh to heartbreakingly beautiful. The future, he said softly. When this is over, I will reclaim my throne, but not for power, for peace, for the world I wanted to build before Bram's betrayal. A world where shifters and humans live without fear of each other. And us? Elowen asked, barely breathing. Us, he murmured, his lips barely an inch from hers. I will build you a home, not a throne room or a citadel, but a place like this, a cottage at the edge of the wild where our children can run free, where you can teach them your wisdom and I can teach them ours, where we can wake each morning to birdsong and fall asleep each night in each other's arms. Our children, Elowen repeated, her heart aching with the beauty of it. Ash and Lumi, Ridian said, and perhaps others, if you want them, if you'll have me, if you'll take a broken king and help him build something better than what he lost. Elowen's hand moved to his face, tracing the scars she'd come to know so well. You're not broken, she said fiercely. You're surviving. You're fighting. You're loving your children when everything has been taken from you. That's not broken. That's strength. Ridian caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Then be strong with me. Fight beside me. And when the dawn comes and we're still standing, say yes to me. Say you'll be my mate, my queen, my everything. Yes, Elowen whispered, unable to hold it back any longer. Yes to all of it. Yes to the future. Yes to you. And then he was kissing her, soft and fierce and full of promise. His lips were warm against hers, his hands gentle in her hair, his entire being focused on her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Elowen kissed him back, pouring everything into it, all her fear, all her hope, all the love she'd been too afraid to name. When they finally pulled apart,
both breathing hard. The moon had climbed to its zenith. The forest was still silent. The danger was still coming. But for this one perfect moment, Elowen let herself believe in the future Ridian had painted. A cottage, children's laughter, a life built not on survival, but on choice. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, Ridian agreed, pulling her close. Always. They sat like that under the full moon, wrapped in each other's arms, stealing this moment of peace before the storm. Inside the cottage, the children slept safely. Around them, the forest held its breath, and somewhere in the darkness, Bram Hollowfang's hunters were closing in, ready to destroy everything they'd built. But for now, there was only this: the moon, the promise, the kiss still burning on Elowen's lips, and the certainty that whatever came next, she would face it not as the hermit of Ironwood, but as the woman who'd chosen love over fear. The woman who would fight like hell to keep it. They came 3 days after the rope bridge fell. Elowen heard them before she saw them. The crack of branches, movement too deliberate to be wind. She set down the bowl of broth and reached for her hunting bow. Ridian's amber eyes tracked her from where he lay by the hearth. The silver shard had been removed, the wound bound with poultices, but he was still weak. The pups, Ash and Storm, huddled against his flank, their injuries mending faster than seemed natural. "How many?" His voice was rough. Elowen counted the shadows moving through the trees. 6, maybe 7. She strung the bow, her fingers steady despite her hammering heart. "They're surrounding the cottage." Ridian tried to rise, his legs shaking with the effort. Elowen crossed to him in 3 strides and pressed her hand against his shoulder. The fur there was warm, still damp from the fever that had broken just yesterday. "You're not ready." "They're here for me." His eyes held hers, ancient and knowing. "Bram's scouts. They'll smell the pups. They'll know. Then they'll have to go through me first." A sound that might have been a laugh rumbled in his chest. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Elowen Hart. I've been called both." She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and lean, moving with the predatory grace that marked him as more than human. Others flanked him, their eyes catching the dim light like coins in a well. The leader stopped 20 paces from the cottage door. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the morning air, smooth as oil and twice as slippery. "We mean no harm to the woman of this house. We seek only what was taken from us, the traitor Ridian Stormclaw and his whelps. Send them out, and you'll have nothing more to fear." Elowen's grip tightened on her bow. She'd heard that tone before, in the merchant's son's voice when he'd cornered her in the granary. Reasonable, reassuring, lying with every word. "There's no one here but me," she called back. "You're wasting your time." The leader smiled, and there was nothing human in it. "We can smell them, wolf blood and silver, and something else, something that reeks of treason." He took a step closer. "Make this easy, woman. We have no quarrel with you." Behind her, Ridian's breathing had changed, deepened. The pups whimpered, pressing closer to their father. Elowen knocked an arrow, drew the string back to her cheek, and aimed for the space between the leader's eyes. "One more step, and you'll have a quarrel with this arrow." The leader's smile widened. "So it's like that, then." He raised his hand, and the scouts began to close in, moving in perfect synchronization. Wolves who could wear human skin, hunters who had never known mercy. Elowen loosed the first arrow. It took the nearest scout in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. She had another arrow knocked before he hit the ground, sent it into the thigh of the wolf rushing the eastern wall. 2 down, 5 to go.
They moved faster now. One leapt for the door, his body already shifting. Eloin's third arrow caught him in the chest, but his momentum slammed him into the wooden barrier, splintering the frame. Rydian! But Rydian was already moving. The transformation was terrible and beautiful. His form expanded, bones reshaping with sounds like breaking branches. The bandages tore away as his body surged upward, becoming something that filled the cottage. Not just a wolf, but something primal. The Alpha. The door gave way, and the scout burst through, more wolf than man now, jaws wide and slavering. Rydian met him with a roar that shook dust from the rafters and drove the air from Eloin's lungs. The two creatures collided in a chaos of fur and blood and snapping teeth, their bodies too large for the confines of the cottage. They crashed through the table, splintered chairs, sent the cookpot spinning across the floor in a cascade of hot coals.
Eloin ducked a swinging paw, rolled beneath Rydian's massive bulk, and came up by the window in time to see two more scouts climbing through the eastern wall they'd torn open. She put an arrow through the first one's eye. The second one lunged for her, claws extended, and she dropped the bow, pulled her skinning knife from her belt, and drove it up under his ribs with all her strength. He fell, gasping, and she yanked the blade free, already turning to face the next threat. The cottage had become a den, and Rydian defended it with the fury of something that had finally found something worth protecting. He moved through the close quarters like water, like shadow, his massive form somehow flowing around Eloin, never striking her, never hindering her as she danced between his legs with her knife and retrieved arrows. They fought as if they'd been doing this for years, reading each other's movements, covering each other's blind spots. The pups had retreated to the corner by the hearth, their small bodies pressed together, but their eyes were fierce, their tiny teeth bared. Not helpless anymore, not prey. The leader burst through the remains of the door, his form shifting between man and wolf, and Eloin saw the silver blade in his hand, twin to the one that had nearly killed Rydian. Saw the way he moved, calculated and cold, aiming not for Rydian's throat, but for his legs, aiming to cripple. She threw her knife. It wasn't a killing throw. She was a hunter, not an assassin, and the blade wasn't balanced for it, but it struck his shoulder, made him flinch, made him slow. Long enough for Rydian to reach him, long enough for those massive jaws to close around the scout's neck. The crack echoed through the cottage. The leader fell and did not rise. The remaining scouts fled, their injuries slowing them, their nerve finally broken. Eloin watched them disappear into the fog, her chest heaving, her hands sticky with blood that wasn't all hers. Silence fell over the cottage like a blanket. Eloin stood in the wreckage of her sanctuary, surrounded by splintered furniture and broken bodies, and felt something in her chest crack open. A laugh bubbled up, or maybe a sob. She couldn't tell which. Everything she'd built in 18 months of isolation, destroyed in minutes. Rydian shifted back, his body shrinking, collapsing in on itself until he was merely the great wolf again, not the impossible creature that had filled the space moments before. He limped to her side, leaving bloody paw prints on the floor, and pressed his massive head against her hip. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "More of them. And next time they'll bring silver arrows and fire." Eloin looked down at him, at the pups emerging cautiously from their corner, at the ruins of the only home she'd had since the village cast her out. She should have been afraid, should have been planning her escape, her survival. But instead, she felt something else rising in her chest, something fierce and sharp as the knife she'd just buried in a wolf's ribs. Then let them come. The days that followed were strange and busy. Rydian's strength returned, the primal transformation having burned away the last poison. The pups grew stronger, their playfulness returning as they tumbled in the clearing behind the cottage. Elowen watched them in the evenings, sitting on the repaired cottage steps, trying not to think about what would happen when he was fully healed. He found her there one night, the moon rising full over the valley. New growth was already pushing through the mud. "I need to go back," he said, settling beside her. In the darkness, his human form was easier to look at, a man with silver-streaked black hair and amber eyes. "I need to go back," he said, settling beside her. In the darkness, his human form was easier to look at, a man with silver-streaked black hair and amber eyes. "To the Stormclaw territory, to my pack." Elowen kept her eyes on the pups. "I know. Bram will have taken the Alpha seat. Every day I wait, his grip grows stronger." His voice roughened. "Then you should go." She made her voice flat, careful. "Come with me." The words hung between them, impossible as everything else that had happened. Elowen turned to look at him. "What?" "I'm asking you to lead, by my side, as my mate, as Queen of the Stormclaw." "I'm human." "You're brave. You jumped into a flood to save children that weren't yours. You defended them with a hunting bow and a skinning knife against trained killers." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "The pack needs someone who knows what it means to survive, who knows what it means to choose to protect even when instinct screams to run." "They'll never accept me." "They will." A smile ghosted across his face. "You're very good at giving them no other choice." Elowen looked down at his hand. She thought about 18 months of isolation, about the safety she'd built from loneliness and walls. She thought about the pups tumbling in moonlight, about Rydian bleeding in the flood, whispering, "My children." She thought about the hermit she'd been, and the woman she might become. Her hand closed over his. "When do we leave?" The journey took 3 days through mountain passes. Rydian moved in wolf form, the pups riding his back. Elowen walked beside them, her bow slung over her shoulder. She'd taken nothing else from the cottage. They crested the final ridge at sunset, and Elowen saw the citadel, caves and stone structures built into the mountain itself, protected by ancient walls. Dozens of wolves moved through the courtyard, all stopped when they saw Rydian. The silence spread like ripples in a pond. One by one, the wolves turned, their eyes widening. Some dropped to their knees immediately. Others stood frozen, disbelief written across their faces. A man stepped forward from the main hall, tall and dark-haired, with a cruel mouth and calculating eyes. Bram. Even without being told, Elowen knew him the way she'd known the merchant's son was lying when he said he loved her. "Rydian," his voice carried across the courtyard, smooth and false. "We thought you were dead." "You hoped I was." Rydian's response was calm, almost conversational. He shifted to human form, standing naked and unashamed in the center of the courtyard, the pups at his feet. His eyes. Elowen ducked a swinging paw, rolled beneath Rydian's massive bulk, and came up by the window in time to see 2 more scouts climbing through the eastern wall they'd torn open. She put an arrow through the first one's eye. The second one lunged for her, claws extended, and she dropped the bow, pulled her skinning knife from her belt, and drove it up under his ribs with all her strength. He fell, gasping, and she yanked the blade free, already turning to face the next threat. The cottage had become a den, and Rydian defended it with the fury of something that had finally found something worth protecting. He moved through the close quarters like water, like shadow, his massive form somehow flowing around Elowen, never striking her, never hindering her as she danced between his legs with her knife and retrieved arrows. They fought as if they'd been doing this for years, reading each other's movements, covering each other's blind spots. The pups had retreated to the corner by the hearth, their small bodies pressed together, but their eyes were fierce, their tiny teeth bared. Not helpless anymore, not prey. The leader burst through the remains of the door, his form shifting between man and wolf, and Elowen saw the silver blade in his hand, twin to the one that had nearly killed Rydian. Saw the way he moved, calculated and cold, aiming not for Rydian's throat, but for his legs, aiming to cripple. She threw her knife. It wasn't a killing throw. She was a hunter, not an assassin, and the blade wasn't balanced for it, but it struck his shoulder, made him flinch, made him slow. Long enough for Rydian to reach him, long enough for those massive jaws to close around the scout's neck. The crack echoed through the cottage. The leader fell and did not rise. The remaining scouts fled, their injuries slowing them, their nerve finally broken. Elowen watched them disappear into the fog, her chest heaving, her hands sticky with blood that wasn't all hers. Silence fell over the cottage like a blanket. Elowen stood in the wreckage of her sanctuary, surrounded by splintered furniture and broken bodies, and felt something in her chest crack open. A laugh bubbled up, or maybe a sob. She couldn't tell which. Everything she'd built in 18 months of isolation, destroyed in minutes. Rydian shifted back, his body shrinking, collapsing in on itself until he was merely the great wolf again, not the impossible creature that had filled the space moments before. He limped to her side, leaving bloody paw prints on the floor, and pressed his massive head against her hip. "They'll come back," he said quietly. "More of them. And next time they'll bring silver arrows and fire." Elowen looked down at him, at the pups emerging cautiously from their corner, at the ruins of the only home she'd had since the village cast her out. She should have been afraid, should have been planning her escape, her survival. But instead, she felt something else rising in her chest, something fierce and sharp as the knife she'd just buried in a wolf's ribs. Then let them come. The days that followed were strange and busy. Rydian's